for Durack.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise today to speak against the Export Control Amendment ending live sheep export by sea Bill 2024. The introduction of this bill represents a complete and utter betrayal of Western Australian farmers and regional communities. There is simply no scientific, economic or animal welfare justification for ending the WA live sheep trade. Those opposite are shutting down a valuable West Australian industry, sadly for their own political benefit. Those opposite have completely misrepresented the industry in terms of standards and scale. One example is their insistence that the live sheep trade is disappearing on its own. This is just another fabrication. A submission to the Standing Committee inquiry by LiveCorp demonstrates that the industry is growing. In 2023, the number of live sheep exported from Australia was 30% higher than the year prior. The reintroduction into the Saudi market provides huge growth opportunities. I also have no doubt that the industry would be able to grow even further if the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestries, that department who's supposed to support the industry, actually did so. Middle East and North African countries, particularly Saudi Arabia, have high demand for live sheep imports due to the limited growth potential for local production, and they have a preference for local, freshly slaughtered, halal meat for use in religious observance and daily diets. The broader region was forecasted to import around 5 million head of live sheep and goats in 2022. This number is forecast to be around 7.3 million head by 2027. The growing demand won't go away if Australian producers are forcibly removed from the market. And this takes me to my second point regarding animal welfare. Australia's live export industry has the highest standards in the world. The Australian Standards for Export of Livestock sets out conditions for the export of livestock, and the Export Supply Chain Assurance System, known as SCAS, requires exporters to enforce Australian strict animal welfare standards on importing countries. This means that animals being exported from Australia are protected throughout the entire process, from Australian paddocks to the point of slaughter in international markets. As these welfare standards are enforced in the feedlots and slaughterhouses of destination markets, sheep that are held and processed abroad are treated the same as our Australian sheep. Australia's live sheep trade is exporting the highest animal welfare standards to the world. This is not just Liberal Party or industry talking points. It is a fact that the standards are recognised by international animal welfare bodies. The World Organisation for Animal Health and Welfare have stated that, and I quote, "Australia has taken animal welfare improvements to the rest of the world, and for this Australia has the organisation's unequivocal support. The live export trade in Australia is leading the world in animal welfare and provide benchmarking." As the Coalition members of the Standing Committee made clear in their dissenting report to the recent inquiry, for Australia to just simply cut and run from this industry will certainly lead to worse international animal welfare standards. No more welfare benchmarks and more sheep being imported from developing nations who do not have the same standards or, in many cases, any standards at all. Another important issue that has been overlooked is the impact that this bill will have on our global reputation and our trading relationships. The Middle East is an important market not just for live sheep, but also for other agricultural commodities. Grain Producers Australia have indicated, and I quote, "This ban will have a negative impact on our trading partners in the Middle East who also buy Australian grains, including for feeding stock and our overall international reputation." Labor's own Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade have confirmed that a linkage had been made by an unnamed Kuwaiti company between Australia's grain exports and the phasing out of the live sheep trade. This bill will only lead to more needless suffering for both regional communities and sheep. So, it begs the question, why is it being done? Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill is nothing to do with sheep. This bill is all to do with politics. Labor is worried that standing with those hard-working West Australian farmers and communities and this vital industry, that this will reduce their chances of holding off the Greens in the inner city seats on the East Coast. Humanity is often brought up, Madam Deputy Speaker, when we have this debate. Well, where is the humanity for my West Australian farmers and regional WA communities more broadly? Where's the humanity for them? The message from regional communities across my electorate of Durack and the member for O'Connor's electorate and the broader Australian agriculture sector has been clear. Do not take away our industry, do not take away our livelihoods. And they're not going to give up. The grassroots campaign in Western Australia, called Keep the Sheep, in just a few weeks, over 60,000 people have signed on to the petition to keep the sheep. The focus of this campaign is to spread awareness of the human impact this bill will have on communities across Western Australia. But it's not just farming families, many of whom have been farming families for generations. It's also the local businesses, it's also the local schools, and it's also the local sporting clubs. Those opposite are taking the livelihood away from at least 3,000 West Australians, but this obviously impacts entire communities spread right across the wheat belt in Western Australia and beyond. I recently joined the Leader of the Opposition for a roundtable discussion with industry stakeholders in Perth. Not surprisingly, we heard from the farmers and also the truckies, but an important point that was made by Darren Spencer from the WA Shearing Association was that at times the shearing industry is the largest employer across many of the affected regional towns. Darren indicated that it will have the impact, I quote, the impact of hard-working people of our shearing industry, including shearers, the rousies, the pressers, the cooks, the classers and the shearing contractors. The live sheep industry provides work outside peak periods and keeps them in the industry. The forecasts have sheep numbers going as low as 9 million next year and 7 million in 2026. So we'll lose nearly half our workforce. End of quote. With the decline of sheep numbers, which is an inevitable impact of this legislation, those opposite are simply taking away the jobs that are simply not going to be replaced with a shift to cropping, which we're already seeing. Less employment means less money flowing into the local pub or the local bakery. It means people will be forced to leave these communities. And that's what the Keep the Sheep campaign is all about, Madam Deputy Speaker, getting that message out there, the human side to this dreadful decision. The Prime Minister, he claims to be on the side of Western Australia. I mean, honestly, he beats his chest about, I'm the friend of WA, I've been there this many times. Well, I tell you what, it doesn't take much for him to sell out Western Australia. Yeah, so West Australians are watching, not just where he goes, or what he says, but actually what he does, and they're watching. The Minister for Agriculture has announced the ban won't come into effect until May 2028. So there is no need for the government to gag or guillotine debate on this bill. So I hope everybody gets an opportunity to have their say. This bill must be subject to a comprehensive Senate inquiry that will hear from all impacted communities, members of the industry and those involved in the supply chain. So I employ those opposite to show some common decency and to announce a legitimate Senate inquiry. The recent charade that was the Standing Committee on Agriculture's 2-week inquiry was an absolute insult to regional West Australians. Honestly, how can anyone justify giving farmers, industry stakeholders and concerned community members just 4 working days to make a submission to the committee? Honestly, it's a joke and it's incredibly disrespectful to the people that I represent. Those opposite clearly have no respect or understanding for our farmers who feed and sustain this nation. Even though there are only 4 days to make a submission, incredibly, 13,000 people made submissions. Given that only a fraction of those have been processed and published, it is unbelievable to me that there could possibly be careful consideration of these submissions prior to the writing of the inquiry report. This was simply a box-ticking exercise for the government, with the result never in doubt. And I hope a legitimate Senate inquiry with a reporting date that allows for thorough examination will allow concerned farmers and stakeholders in my electorate to finally be heard. Even though I believe this inquiry was a true waste of time, I was proud to attend and to speak at the single hearing that took place in Western Australia in the small town of Muresk within my electorate. My contribution at the hearing included a letter from Wesley and Louise Hagboom from Darren, which eloquently detailed the impact to their farming business and the broader community this ban will have. The turnout at the hearing was incredible, with almost 2,000 people coming along to support the Keep the Sheep campaign. Cars stretched multiple kilometres down the road from the US Institute. Such is the passion to defend this industry and regional Western Australia. I do appreciate that some Labor members on the committee were able to hear directly from concerned stakeholders and community members, but I do struggle to believe that it would be impossible for them not to be moved by the powerful testimonies of those who were able to speak directly to the committee. Former Senator and veterinary surgeon Chris Back made a great point during his submission that this decision to ban the live sheep trade for the minister was simply an issue of mind over matter. The minister's approach has been, I don't mind and you don't matter. I think that sums up the issues pretty well. Another important point is the inevitable toll this legislation will have on the mental health of farmers and the broader community. The $107 million transition package announced by this government acknowledges the seriousness of the mental health fallout this bill will have on the members of WA rural and regional communities. Unfortunately, I believe the impact is well underestimated. I do not believe any amount of counselling can ameliorate the damage being done en masse to each and every member of the supply chain, their forebears and their future generations. They will see their livelihoods not only ruined, but their reputations sullied, leaving them pigeonholed as animal abusers by an animal welfare lobby hell-bent on ending all livestock production and transportation. As stated by the Wool Producers CEO Joe Hall, and I quote, "The mental health impacts of the decision to ban live exports cannot be overstated. As a cohort, primary producers are already overrepresented in suicidal rates as compared to the general public. A responsible government should be developing policies to reduce this incident, not making decisions that add further stress." The announcement of this ban only adds to the pain farmers are currently suffering due to the severe decline in the price of sheep, Labor's cost of living crisis and a period of drought. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll conclude by reaffirming that the Coalition's commitment to the future of Australian agriculture is ironclad. I will not be supporting this disgraceful and cruel bill, and I'm proud to say that we are united on this side of the House. The Liberal Party stands in solidarity with Australian farmers and the agriculture sector in strongly condemning and opposing Labor's destructive policy to shut down live sheep exports. We are committed to upholding the most highest standards of animal health and welfare while supporting a lawful and sustainable live export trade. If this bill is passed by the House and Senate, when we are elected to government in not such a long period of time, we will introduce legislation to reinstate the live sheep export industry. Given the constant attacks on regional Australia, I can only hope that this will occur sooner rather than later. I thank you.